future. And I'd like you to think about the future for the young people in your life. So think of your children or young people you work with, and just think for a moment about what do you want for them in the future. Any ideas you have, if you want to type them through, I'd be really interested to see what your ideas are. Okay, to be independent. Great, that's a good one. Okay, I've got here to be healthy and to be strong, to be happy and to be secure. Wow, look, they're all coming through. You want them to have a job. Great. You want your young people to be confident. Okay, more confidence is coming through. Successful. You want your kids to be successful. That's great. Okay, I've got to be at peace, well educated. Be part of the community, to make a contribution, to make a difference. To be safe, to be secure, to have a sense of security. Lovely. To love their jobs. Wow, that's what we all want to be doing, is loving our jobs. High self-esteem, that ability to like themselves. Fantastic. Happy, great. Let's see a few more coming through. Okay, so what I've got here is to have passion, to feel connected, to be part of something, to take pride in what they do. Caring about other people. Wow, this is fantastic. Okay, brave, to be brave and courageous, to care about others, to be lifelong learners. Okay, we're going to hold it there. We're going to hold it there. What an amazing collection. To be honest and valued. Oh my God, they keep coming through. To meet challenges. They're all wonderful things. Keep them coming and I'll refer to them as we go along a bit. But what I'm getting here is some amazing language in terms of your aspirations for the young people in your life. And it's really interesting because when I look at that vocabulary, it reminds me of a word, and the word begins with F. Now that could be fabulous, it could be fantastic, it could be fun, but the word I want to talk about to you is the word to flourish. Now to flourish, people often think immediately about flourishing. They think about growth, about flowers, about blooming, something which is about thriving, something which is about growing. But flourishing actually is a scientific term. And in the context of positive psychology, flourishing means to have positive emotion. Now, we can't take this for granted. Some people find it quite difficult to experience positive emotion. You've asked, you want your kids to feel happy, to feel pride, to feel valued, to feel connected. That's all they're really important emotions. Flourishing people also have engagement in their lives. They have a sense of working to their strengths, being stretched and being challenged, because life isn't really easy, and being stretched and challenged is often really quite difficult. Flourishing people also have a sense of meaning and purpose in their life. So they recognize they're actually connecting to something bigger. It's not just all about me, it's about my community, my family, and the people around me. So your aspirations for people to be globally aware, to be connected, to feel part of something is hugely important in terms of meaning. Flourishing people also have a sense of accomplishment, that they set out, they have goals, and they're able to reach and strive towards those goals. We know that the goal striving is arguably as important, if not more so, than actually getting to the end and actually achieving the goal, but having that sense of purpose. And flourishing people also have positive relationships. Now, we all struggle with relationships. Everybody has difficulty sometimes with relationships, but flourishing people try to actually engender positivity in their relationships. And also what we know about flourishing people is that what flourishing does is it builds resilience. And that ability for us to bounce back, that ability for us to face challenge, to face adversity. Because let's face it, we all know this, no one has the perfect life. It doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, and what you do. And it's our capacity to get through the challenges in life which help us to maintain that sense of overall well-being. So I think it's amazing that you want your young people, clearly by the way you've described what you want for them, you want them to flourish. But, and there is a bit of a but here, let's have a look at the reality. The reality is that what research tells us is that levels of unhappiness, levels of languishing means to struggle to experience positive emotion, levels of anxiety and stress, levels of hopelessness, and levels of depression are actually increasing in young people and adolescents. Goes for the adult community too. So despite the fact that we want our young people to flourish, the evidence tells us in some cases that young people are actually struggling in this particular area. So, and I also, I guess I know from my experience in working particularly within youth and community services, that young people who struggle in education, young people who struggle in school, are more likely to experience some of that stress, that anxiety, and that sense of hopelessness. But it doesn't mean it's all doom and gloom by any means. Some research that's been done by the University of Cambridge has looked at the capacity of communities, of populations to flourish. And the actual findings are quite interesting. And what the research tells us is that only really 20% of people are likely to be in that really flourishing, that really highly engaged space. It doesn't mean everybody else is miserable at all. Many people are doing well. But what we want to do is to help people who are doing well to do even better, to get to that space where they can actually try to be their best. So if you want your kids to flourish, the young people you work with to flourish, what you're looking for is to try and help move those young people into that top 2 or 3 out of 10. And the good news is that through the positive psychology movement and some of the work that's now taking place in schools and youth services and in communities, we're finding ways to help people to increase their levels of well-being. So before I explore a bit of that, maybe we ought to just touch a little bit on why, with everything we've got access to today, with more money, with better healthcare, with greater technology, with more opportunity and more choice, why is it actually that levels of anxiety, depression, hopelessness, etc. are actually arising? And there's a whole heap of reasons why that might be the case. Some of it may be to do with family breakdown. Obviously, there's issues of people actually, in terms of sort of socio-economic issues to some degree, come into that. That's quite clear. But we also know there's a couple of other things. That one of the concerns that we have is that we have this idea called affluenza. Is that very much these days, young people are very much, and sometimes us as adults, are very much focused on the idea of we want something because somebody else has actually got it. I've got a picture of Snow White's stepmother, the wicked queen, on the screen. Now, she is the most beautiful woman in the world until she finds out that Snow White is more beautiful than her. So what does she want to do? Well, she wants to kill Snow White. So there's not a terribly healthy response to the fact that somebody else has got something that she actually wants. So this idea of envy and social comparison is really potentially quite damaging, because it means that we become very quickly dissatisfied with what we've got. And we also have this other issue, we call it the hedonic treadmill, the I want more treadmill. And the idea here is that we actually get on this roller coaster, this treadmill of wanting things. And when we get them, we're actually happy for about 5 minutes or a couple of weeks, and then actually we want more. And reason we want more often is because somebody else has got something bigger and better than something that I've got. So we get this sense of dissatisfaction. So despite the fact that we have a great deal, because we actually want more, because we compare ourselves to other people, we don't get that sense of well-being and that sense of happiness. There's an interesting paper called Falling Happiness in a Rising Economy by a guy called Harold Brockman, which looked at well-being in China, where there's been unprecedented growth in terms of income, but actually levels of happiness and well-being have gone down in China. And so the people from Cambridge University, the Wellbeing Institute at Cambridge University, at the moment are doing work with the Chinese government, looking at how they can try to raise levels of well-being and flourishing in China. So this disproportionate focus on, in some ways, always focusing on wanting things that we need and comparing to each other. The positive psychology movement actually really wants to try to help us to address that. And oh, there's my treadmill's just come up. Sorry, I wonder where that was. That was there. Okay. So I'm just going to talk about positive psychology for a moment. So positive psychology. Martin Seligman is seen as pretty much the leader in the positive psychology movement. It's only been around really for probably the last sort of 12 years or so. I think 1990, probably a bit longer, about 1998, 1999, Martin Seligman really tried to introduce a shift from psychology, focusing on issues about problems and issues about struggle and about depression, to looking at actually how can psychology help people who are okay to do actually even better. So the purpose of positive psychology is to understand the human strengths that enable individuals and communities to thrive, to grow, and to be their best. And positive psychology is, as I said, it's a science. So as I've talked about, it's a scientific study of flourishing. There's a very strong evidence base. So as I said, all the things I'm talking about tonight, there's reference papers to back everything up. Some very, very interesting studies have been done over the last 10 years or so. Positive psychology is informing economic and social policy at a global level, because there's this recognition that it's not just about earning more money, about having more things. It's about helping people to become far more engaged, to get more meaning and purpose in their lives. It's not just about feeling good about what we've got. It's getting out there and doing things. We also know that positive psychology is being applied in government, in business, in organizations, in schools and communities. So there's a whole raft of applications, again, which have been proven to be very effective in helping organizations, schools and communities to do better. Now, in terms of doing better, this is a key question. In order to do better, sometimes what we need to do is to focus on www. And the idea here is to focus on what's working well. Now, so many times, so many conversations that we have tend to focus on problems. And often, and there is a negativity bias, which actually means that often if I have something happens to me today that's not very good, I'm far more likely to go home tonight and actually think about, talk about the things that went wrong, rather than actually think and talk about the things that went well. And so positive psychology, a lot of the interventions give us the opportunity to focus on the things in life that are going well and to find ways to do more of that and get a sense of perspective on the things that are going wrong. And we know that we can do better. The research from Sonny Liebermersky, the reference is on the screen, and Sheldon and Schacht, very, very interesting research that demonstrates that our well-being, our capacity to flourish, if you like, is based upon three things. Partly it's genetic. I am the sum of my parents at the end of the day. So genetically, I have what we call a fixed point, which means that however many good things happen to me, maybe my level of well-being satisfaction will go up for a period of time, but it will go back down towards my set point eventually. If something very challenging happens to me, my set point may go down, but eventually it would just go back up to where it would normally be. So we all have a particular set point for our well-being, which is pretty much fixed. Circumstances also play an important role. So what I do, where I live, what I look like, how much money I've got, the country I live in, the culture I come from, all of these things potentially have an impact on our well-being. And thirdly, what has an impact on our well-being is what we call intentional activity. It's what we choose to feel, what we choose to think, and what we choose to do with our time, our resources, and our opportunities. And it's quite interesting in terms of how these are broken down. So what the research tells us is that 50% of our well-being is pretty much genetic. So if we have two identical twins, one's brought up in a place where it's very difficult for people to flourish, another one's brought up in a place where there's every opportunity to flourish, they will actually have the same, 50% of those twins will have the same levels of well-being and capacity to flourish. Circumstances only accounts for 10% of our levels of well-being. Now, people find this one extremely difficult to believe, often because we spend so much time thinking about our circumstances. I want an extra room in my house. I want a new car. The children want a new Wii game, or we want a new mobile phone. We think about these things, believing that when we get them, we're going to feel so much better. But as I said, due to social comparison, due to adaptation, we do feel better, but it's very fleeting. We only feel better for a very short space of time. So what we know is that 40% potentially of our well-being comes down to what we choose to think, feel, and do. So many of the interventions that we're using within positive education, within evidence-based coaching, within organizational development work is focused on the idea of helping people to make choices, to feel better, to think better, and to do better. And that's actually what I would like to, just going to go back to that slide, that's what I'd like to be focusing on for the rest of the presentation tonight, just to give you some ideas about how we actually do that. Okay, So I'm going to just talk a little bit about positive education. So positive education applies the research base in positive psychology and looks at it in the context of educational settings for young people. This could be in schools, it could be in colleges, it could be within communities and within obviously youth services and children's services. The aim is obviously to help create more resilient and resourceful young people. A wide range of applications. And I think another important point for me to make here is that it's also, positive education is also about creating more resilient and resourceful teachers, youth workers and parents. Because at the end of the day, if we don't look after ourselves, then how do we actually look after the young people effectively in our lives? So positive education programs are not just focused on the students, they're often focused on what we call the whole school community or the whole organization. So that's something which is an important point to be mindful of. Okay, so I'm going to just talk a little bit about what we know about positive emotion. We've got joy on the screen, which is a lovely word. I've already explained to you, hopefully, that well-being isn't just about feeling happy. It's not just about feeling pleasure. It's about engagement. It's about meaning. It's about accomplishment. It's about our relationships. But what we know about the ability to experience positive emotion is very important. The work of Barbara Fredrickson has told us very clearly that experiencing positive emotion does something very important. It broadens our capacity to see the big picture, to be creative, to think and to learn. So by effortfully trying to create more positive emotion, we're creating a climate that allows us to grow, to solve problems and to see solutions. The other very important part of this theory about positive emotion is that we know that experiencing positive emotion actually builds our resources. So it builds our physical resources, that people are healthier and stronger and get sick less often when they experience more positivity. Positivity builds our social resources, that we have stronger connections. Part of being resilient is about having protective factors around us. And obviously, the people around us can be very important. They could be risk factors, but they could be very, very important in terms of our protective factors. Positive emotions also build our emotional resources and our psychological resources and our intellectual resources. So we've got this whole heap of evidence that demonstrates that engendering more positive emotion can only actually be good for us. Now, I liken this a little bit to the idea of a piggy bank and a bank account. If we think about it, every time I put $10 or $5 into the piggy bank, it's like if I experience effortfully a positive emotion, it's like I'm making an investment for myself. Because tomorrow, when I'm faced with a challenge, an adversity, something which is really difficult for me to work through, I've got some resources there I can draw upon. And this is how we help people to understand this idea that, you know, we want to flourish, but we're always going to face setbacks. We're always going to face knockbacks. It's our capacity to get through those challenges that allows us, as I've said before, to continue and to try to continue to be our best, to sustain our levels of well-being. So engendering positive emotion is like putting money into a bank account. We've got some reserves that we can draw upon. When we live our life in stress or fear or anxiety, in that negative state, we're not putting any resources into the bank. So when we get faced with real trauma, real adversity, we're far less likely to be able to actually get through. And let's just have a quick flavor of potentially some of the emotions that we need to try and engender more in people. The idea of gratitude, being grateful, wanting what we've got rather than always trying to get what we want. Interest, curiosity, joy, awe, pride. Now, pride's an interesting one. People often say, well, you know, you shouldn't be too proud. We don't want to come across as arrogant. But pride is about recognizing there's evidence to suggest that we've done something well. It's about achieving, about accomplishment, and that sense we can get quite justifiably that we've done something which makes us feel good about ourselves. So pride is a very important emotion to have. We've got a few more. Amusement. It's good to have fun. Yeah, it's not all about fun, but it's good to have fun. Inspiration. The idea about being creative about ideas. Love is really important. Serenity, the idea about feeling at peace with yourself, as somebody actually said that they want for their children. And hope. Hope is very, very important as an emotion. And I'm going to touch on hope a bit later on to explain how we, again, know that the positive psychology interventions that we talk about can actually help to increase people's hope. So experiencing positive emotion is extremely important. Now, things get in the way of us experiencing positivity. Real life does, you know, real life is not easy. We know that. Real life means I'm going to get angry, I'm going to get upset, I'm going to get challenged. No one's pretending we're going through life and everything's going to be happy all the time. And it's interesting you notice that happiness isn't actually on that list. It's actually sort of, it's important to feel happy, but working to effortfully develop some of these emotions arguably is equally, if not more important. So what gets in the way of us being able to be positive and developing more positivity? Well, these things get in the way. Ants. So, any idea what ants might be? Is anyone going to give me a clue as to what ants might be? Okay, I'm just looking to see. Anxiety? No. Negativity? Productive? Negativity? Okay, ants are automatic negative thoughts. Okay, as human beings, we are hardwired to look for threat and to look for danger. So, you know, it's very common that, you know, in prehistoric times, if a dinosaur comes down the street, I need to be ready to defend myself, to run away or to hide. Because if I don't do that, I'm not going to survive. And so as human beings, we are hardwired to look for danger and to look for threat. But these days, there's not so many dinosaurs actually around. And what we know is that, you know, we're often being affected by negative thinking that actually impacts us in a way that increases anxiety and increases stress. And we often don't even recognize we're actually experiencing these thoughts. So one of the first things that we need to try and help young people to do, and we need to do ourselves as teachers or youth workers or parents, is to actually recognize when we're thinking negatively. Now, I used an example with some people earlier on today by asking them, have you ever been talking to people and telling yourself at the same time you're talking complete rubbish? Now, I hope that's not happening to me right now, but sometimes we undermine ourselves. And when we undermine ourselves, we don't argue back. If we say to somebody else, well, maybe I'm talking complete rubbish, hopefully that person would come back to me and say, well, no, you're not. You're making perfect sense, Clive. But it's very difficult sometimes to argue with ourselves. So we do often, thousands of times a day, for some people, undermine ourselves with negative thinking. So what we need to do is to replace the ants with some pets. Now, we love pets, don't we? The whole idea of pets is that we nurture them, we love them, we want to look after them. So the idea of pets, any idea what pets might be? Okay, any idea about pets? Okay, positive, yep, okay. Pets are performance enhancing thoughts. Okay, now, and there's a reason why we say performance enhancing thoughts. Feeling more positive is really good. So rather than me feeling anxious or stressed or fearful, it's much better that I feel interested or curious or joyful. But actually, it's what I do with that opportunity that's really important. I need to do some action, take some action with it. So it's not just about thinking more positively, it's actually about doing something about it. So we're looking for what we call performance enhancing thoughts. Now, a technique that's been very widely used now within schools, certainly within the US, to some degree in Australia, and there's been some pilot projects operating across the UK, is an activity called a tool called learned optimism. And again, there's a reference for this in the back page of my presentation. So learned optimism is an approach where we help young people, and we can help each other, to recognize that certain events trigger in us particular negative beliefs. Things happen, and as a result of things, we actually start to get a negative belief in our mind. So I'm going to just run through a very quick example of this with you. So I want you to imagine that I'm George and I'm in year 9, and I've been having trouble with my maths class, and I didn't do very well at all in my last test. So the adverse event, if you like, the trigger, is my difficulties with my maths class. So B are the beliefs, is the negative beliefs, the negative thinking that might kick in. So I'm George, I've not been doing very well in maths recently, so my negative beliefs are likely to be what? Anybody got an idea about what my negative beliefs might be? Can't see anything coming through. I'll give you some ideas. Okay, so I'm thinking that I'm no good at maths, I'm useless, I'm stupid, My teacher doesn't like me. Everybody thinks I'm stupid. I'm going to fail. I hate school. I hate everyone. In fact, I hate the world. So my negative beliefs about maths actually start to escalate into beliefs about myself as a person. Well, I'm stupid. I'm no good. What happens is that those beliefs have consequences. So those beliefs have consequences for my feelings. So my feelings are feelings of stress, anxiety, shame, fear, or embarrassment, which are all negative feelings. As a result of that, my body starts to get into a position of stress. Maybe I feel a bit sick, I get very tense. Maybe I break out in spots, which when you're in year 9 is not something you want to be happening. It makes you feel even worse. And of course, my behavior gets into that narrow idea of protection. So maybe I get into the fight mode. I get a bit lippy with the teacher. I get a bit aggressive. I get a bit defensive. Maybe I withdraw. I run away. So maybe I actually avoid going to school. I take time off sick. Or maybe I just freeze and withdraw. None of those are good consequences. So the idea of the D is that we dispute. Whoops, sorry. D is that we, whoops, sorry, I'll be with you 2 secs. Oops. Okay, just having a slight technical here. Okay, so the D, there should be a D coming up. The D is actually for to dispute. And the idea of disputing is to say, well, are any of these beliefs actually based on real evidence? Well, I maybe just be asking someone to come and just help me to just see if I can unfreeze my screen here. So D is to dispute. So I'll just carry on as we're going through. So I need to think about, well, thank you very much. So are my grades really that terrible? Well, maybe actually I got a C rather than a B. And is a C really that bad? Am I good at anything at school? Well, of course I am. I'm good at art. I'm good at sport. Most of the time I quite like school. It's just over this particular maths class issue that I've got myself upset. Can I blame a teacher if I've been rude to the teacher? Well, actually, no, because obviously we can't blame the teacher for being upset about that. But does the teacher really hate me? Does the teacher want me to fail? Well, actually, well, of course not. Am I a good guy? Well, actually, I'm a nice guy. I've got lots of friends. And in fact, I feel quite grateful about the opportunity to go to that school. It's a really good school. And what I do is I start to help myself, or we start to help young people to actually think about what's the reality here? What is the real situation? And get a different sense of perspective, which hopefully starts to engender a greater sense of confidence, a greater sense of self-esteem. I feel calmer and think more clearly. And then I'm in a position to think about the E, which is the idea of the energization. And the energization element is the will to act, the will to do something different, and the will to actually change. So examples might be, okay, I'll apologize to the teacher. I'll aim to get a B next time. I'll practice calming myself down when I feel a bit stressed. I'll look forward to things I really enjoy. I'll give myself a treat. So that's a very quick introduction to the idea of learned optimism. Okay, so there's just 4 more positive emotions I want to touch on quickly. Hope. Engendering hope in young people is really important. We know that hopeful people have goals. They have a sense of self-belief, a sense of what we call agency, and they are able to find different routes to reach their goals, particularly if they fail first time around. So we need to be looking at ways that we can try and engender hope in young people. Mindfulness activity, hugely important in terms of helping young people to manage stress, manage anxiety. Cambridge University have done a fairly recent study looking at 14 to 15-year-old boys, and the study on mindfulness demonstrated increased levels of well-being and functioning, greatest benefits for those suffering from high anxiety. Savoring, enjoying the moment is hugely important. Sometimes we're so goal focused we forget to enjoy the journey. So the idea of savoring even the company activities we're doing is really important. And then the 3 good things, gratitude, as a very powerful gratitude exercise where we just regularly ask people to think about what are they grateful for in their life at the moment, what's going well. I actually used this activity today with a group of people, and they found it very important, very beneficial, because we take so much for granted we take so much granted for things that are going on around us. Okay, So what I want to move on to now is the idea of engagement. I've talked a bit about why positive emotions are so important, and I want to talk a bit about engagement. So here is a quote about a young man in high school. He is mentally slow, unsociable, and adrift forever in his foolish dreams. And it wasn't about me. So any idea who this quote might have been about? Einstein, well done. Whoever said Einstein, you nailed it. So the quote was about Albert Einstein. So this is just an example of a situation where often people who end up being highly successful were actually potentially underachievers when they were at school. Is that at school they were maybe a bit bored, they weren't particularly engaged, or maybe they weren't particularly motivated. So I wanted to just touch on this because often again, you know, schools do fantastic jobs. There is no question that they do fantastic jobs. But we all know of young people who are not as engaged at school as they might be. And often they're compared unfavorably to other young people, that they're not doing quite so well. They could be doing better. So maybe again in terms of maths or in terms of science or in terms of French. But if we say, for example, there's a young girl called Sally and she could be doing better in terms of some of her school subjects, where do we hear about Sally's leadership skills? Where do we hear about her kindness? Where do we hear about her citizenship? Where do we hear about her other strengths that she might have? So one of the key components of positive psychology and positive education programs is helping people to identify their strengths. And we do that through a number of ways. I'm just going to explain what a strength is. So when I talk about strengths, what I'm looking at is the idea of something which is natural to us. It's a strength, arguably, is something which is pre-existing, something that we do well, something that energizes us. And this is what's really important, is that when we work to our strengths, we're more likely to be highly engaged and highly energized. And also, from an ethical perspective, the idea of strengths are things that we do which enhance rather than diminish people. And one of the very important ways that we can identify strengths is through the Values in Action Character Strengths Survey. Now, for those of you who haven't heard of this before, this is a highly validated strengths assessment tool. It identifies 24 character strengths which are cross-cultural and universal. So examples of character strengths will be things like creativity, curiosity, open-mindedness, bravery, integrity, vitality, citizenship, fairness and equity, humility and modesty, gratitude. These are all examples of character strengths. And what we can do is we can go online and we can actually identify through an online assessment, it's free, our signature strengths. And you'll find at viame.org a free survey for adults, for young people under 17, and for children. And this is a tool that's being very widely used now within schools and youth services to help young people to recognize and to identify a language of strengths. It's great for teachers, it's great for parents, it's something you can do at home, it's something you can do at school. There's been some fantastic projects and programs done where they develop a whole school language of strengths. Year 5 boys, for example, developing strength shields with their 5 signature strengths on the shield. So they recognize that these strengths are protective factors for them. So some really good things you can do there. So I really recommend going on to the viame.org website and having a look at that strengths assessment tool. Benefits of using strengths are huge. So I'm just going to flash these up for you. We know from the research people are happier, they're more engaged, they've got more confidence, less stress, anxiety and depression. Strengths also have an important role in developing meaning in our life, because what we can try to do through these programs is encourage young people to use strengths for a greater good and to give something back. So as an example, I've just worked late last year on a program with a boys' high school where we were looking at helping the year 10 boys, looking at helping them to identify their signature strengths for use in a school social justice program. So the idea was that they could identify their signature strengths, think about how they could apply those strengths in relation to social justice, which gives them huge benefits in terms of potentially going for job interviews or university interviews in the future, because they can provide evidence of their strengths use in practice where they've made a real difference. Also, in terms of accomplishment, that we know through a heap of research that's gone on into goal setting, that people are far more likely to be successful in reaching their goals if they're working to things which are really interesting and important and relevant to them. So helping young people to actually identify their strengths, work more to their strengths, means that they're more likely to be successful in their goal setting and their achievement. What's also really important, is that when we work more to our strengths, the sense of engagement we get, that sense of vitality we get, means we're much better equipped to deal with the challenges and the setbacks and the weaknesses and the areas for development. So rather than always focusing on what we need to be doing better, we don't ignore what we need to do better, but by working more to our strengths, we're stronger and better able to deal with some of the harder things that we have to do. And that's real life. That affects everybody, whether we're at school or whether we're at work. Okay, another key area I just want to touch on very quickly is around relationships. Using, again, our strengths in terms of building relationships is really important. The butterfly effect, the butterfly is on here because of the butterfly effect. What we know about positivity in relationships is similar to the butterfly effect. The butterfly effect, for those of you who may not be aware, is a butterfly flaps its wings in Japan and it creates a sandstorm in the Sahara Desert. Something huge happens as a result of something actually very small. The same applies for positivity in relationships. And we know that there is a 3-to-1, what they call a positivity to negativity ratio. I've got stuck again, I'm afraid. Oops. Sorry. So it was a 3-to-1 positivity to negativity ratio, where we know, oops, I don't know why it's doing that, sorry. Okay, okay, sorry about that. So trying to increase more positivity in our relationships is really important. So, and the balance, this 3-to-1, we increase the level of positivity in relationships by actually giving people more attention, by actually supporting people, listening to people, by asking questions of them rather than telling them what to do, by sharing hopes, dreams and goals, obviously, and actually sharing our strengths, playing and having fun together. So anything we can do to increase the level of positivity in our relationships is also really important. Okay. So, going to touch on coaching very quickly. Coaching is a positive psychology intervention, and we know that coaching can be very important in terms of helping both adults and young people to increase well-being. What coaching does, it helps us, first of all, to set a vision and goals for a future. It helps to identify our strengths, helps us to focus on what's working well. It helps to develop self-confidence and self-belief. And it helps us to decide the best way forward. Coaching is about getting people to take positive action and moving forward. And it provides some accountability, some affirmation, and some support. So we know coaching is a really powerful intervention, and it's being, again, used now much more widely in schools, with teachers, with pupils, within youth services, etc. In terms of some studies, there's a whole range of studies which have been going on in Australia. There's a current study at Knox Grammar School run through Susie Green from the Positive Psychology Institute in partnership with Sydney University, with Wollongong University. It's the world's first actually validated, measured study, a 3-year program in terms of a whole school approach to positive education. There's also work going on with Sydney Boys and Girls Public School, Mosman Primary, Geelong Grammar down in Victoria was one of the first schools in the world to look at a positive education program. Scotch College, MLC, and I've been looking at some work within flourishing or youth services, looking at flourishing within youth services. So there's a range of studies that have been conducted in this area. And what the outcomes are telling us, oops, sorry. Okay, sorry, whoops, sorry. Okay, so outcomes. So outcomes of some of the studies that have been completed. actually indicate, these are coaching studies and some positive education studies, is that these interventions within educational settings reduce stress and anxiety and depression, increase optimism and hope, increase well-being and hardiness and resilience, increase engagement, goal striving, and improve social skills and behavior. So there's an awful lot of evidence beginning to build out there that these interventions can be very positive within educational settings and obviously with young people. So that's sort of bringing me towards the end of my presentation. What I just wanted to do was just obviously to do just a bit of a recap very quickly, in the sense that the key message here for young people is that happiness in itself, feeling happy, feeling okay, feeling satisfied, is not in itself equating to the idea of well-being. The well-being is a lot more than that. Well-being is about having a life of meaning, and it's about being engaged. When we do things with meaning, when we do things when we're highly engaged, sometimes it's not fun at all. Sometimes it's very, very difficult. It's very, very challenging, and it's downright scary. But it's getting through some of that fear, getting outside the comfort zone, that gives us that real sense of well-being in the end. The second thing is that actively, effortfully developing more opportunities to experience positivity broadens and builds. Okay, it broadens our capacity to think, it builds our resilience. Thirdly, there are ways we can challenge our negative thinking. We need to recognize it, we need to get a sense of perspective, and working through learned optimism can help us to do that. And then we have the issue about strengths-based approaches, that we know that working more to our strengths, identifying our strengths, is likely to help young people to become far more resourceful and far more resilient. So there's an awful lot going on. I'm sure things are going on in your own children's schools or in schools maybe you're working in. So very interested to hear what's happening. Very happy to provide more information and support. A couple of really good books on my reference list. The How of Happiness, Sonia Lyubomirsky, and Positivity by Barbara Fredrickson. Very practical, very easy to read, all evidence-based, and I'd highly recommend them. We will also be sending you a link to this webinar recording. So if you'd like to recap anything or pass any of this on to your friends or to your children's school, please feel free to do so. So I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. The aim of the positive psychology movement is to try and have 51% of people in the population flourishing by 2051. It's a bit of a long way ahead, and it may be a bit too late for some of us. But I do hope that your kids, the children in your lives, will be part of that 51%. And also that you yourselves can take something away from tonight in order to feel better, think better, do better, and ultimately for you all to flourish. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to take any questions in the remaining few minutes that we've got. Thank you. So, okay, I'm just looking to see if there's any questions coming through. Thank you, thank you. Very nice to be thanked. Okay. Okay, someone's asking if I could talk more on building resilience. One thing I'll just say about resilience is that we know there are some personal assets which indicate that people are likely to be more resilient. One is around people who are resilient are probably going to be likely to be more optimistic. People who are resilient are likely to be more sociable, maybe slightly more extroverted. But we also know that resilient people have a range of protective factors around them. And they're actually very good at asking for help. And so what we know again is that by helping young people to improve their levels of optimism, learn how to become more optimistic, which you can do, and by helping young people to build that sense of self-esteem, to be able to identify their strengths, they're far more able then to actually say, well, there are things I'm good at doing, and there are actually things I'm not so good at doing, and I feel better about asking for help for things I might need support on. So the idea of building resilience is very much around that, recognizing that we need to be mindful about the external factors and the internal factors that indicate someone's more likely to be resilient. But that, and it is coming back to the idea I think I said about putting the money into the piggy bank, is that the more opportunity we get to feel good about ourselves in a realistic way, that's likely to build that sense of well-being, and get us through the difficult times. Okay, there's a question here about how does positive psychology differ from strength-based approaches? I think the answer to that is that strengths-based approaches are very much part of what we would see as the positive psychology movement. There's been work looking at strengths-based approaches for quite some time, and the two really are coming together and dovetailing. And so any positive psychology program, whether it be around coaching, looking at organizations, looking at schools, inevitably will have a focus on strengths, because there's so much evidence out there now to demonstrate that when we work to our strengths, we're more likely to have that sense of well-being, to build that sense of resilience, and to get that sense of accomplishment and achievement. I'll just say one thing about strengths is that there's a very, very good tool out there as well called the Realize 2. So it's Realize, then with the number 2. What the Realize 2 does is there isn't a version yet for young people, but it's a really good tool for adults, is it actually makes the distinction between realized strengths, which are things that energize us, that we do well and we get to use regularly, and learned behaviors. Because many of us may have experience at some time in our careers or lives of being very busy doing things which aren't natural strengths. We've learned to do them very well, and we're never going to get that sense of real engagement and that real sense of energization from things that aren't natural to us. So finding opportunities to identify and work to our realized strengths is also very important. So the Realize 2 tool is another one that you might want to have a look at. Okay, the book titles again. The book titles were in the reference page, which is at the back of this presentation. The How of Happiness by Sonia Liebermersky and Positivity by Barbara Fredrickson. As I say, both very interesting. Thank you. And very applicable, practical books to read. So there's a question here from Louise. Does someone sometimes have to push a child to build resilience, hard balance to achieve between their abilities and making them try harder? Well, I guess that's true. We need to encourage young people to get outside of their comfort zone. We've all, as adults, we've probably all been stretched. We've all been challenged. There's a dilemma that sometimes we talk about. If you could give your child a pill, a completely natural pill, no side effects, other than the fact that they would never ever have to experience hardship, they'd never experience pain, they'd never experience loss, they'd never experience grief, would you give your child that pill? It's a dilemma. Most people will say, well, no, because life is about experiencing the hard stuff. Life is about getting through the hard stuff. And so sometimes, obviously, we do need to give a bit of a push. And on that basis, young people learn that they get through the other side. Okay, can you explain the idea of flow? Okay, so flow is one of the best psychological states we can get into. Flow is when we are so highly engaged that the time goes really quickly, just like I must have been experiencing now, because the last hour has gone in about 3 minutes as far as I can see. So the idea of flow is, and often we get flow when we're working to our strengths, when we're being stretched, we're being completely engrossed, using our natural resources. So you could get flow playing with your children, you could get flow sailing a boat, reading a book, but to get flow in terms of your work, to get flow in terms of things you do with other people within the community, is extremely powerful, and it's a very positive state to actually get into. So normally it's around when we're being stretched and we're being challenged, all our resources are coming to the table, and we're really not even aware of it. We're just so into the moment, and then at the end of a period of flow, you normally feel exhilarated and exhausted. It's actually one of those good exhausted times. Whoa, that's an interesting one. There's a question about the fact that maybe at school a lot of time is spent on learned behaviours. Where is there the time to find 25 sets of individual strengths? That's an interesting question, isn't it? If you do an exercise, there's lovely exercises you can do. If you look at having pictures around the classroom of, you know, what does vitality mean? What does creativity mean? What does kindness mean? What does citizenship mean? Just have visual images around the classroom that remind children about the language of strengths. And what you'll find is that kids start to say, oh, I think Sally's courageous. So why do you think Sally's courageous? Because here is the evidence. I think Johnny's kind. I think somebody else shows leadership. So it's very, you know, so the idea is to integrate. It's not about to have necessarily, there are standalone lessons that are run in schools, looking at issues around strengths, relationships, meaning, purpose, but it's also about trying to integrate some of this into the work that we do. If someone's looking at English, if someone's studying Shakespeare, for example, what are Hamlet's signature strengths? What are Winnie the Pooh's signature strengths? You know, there's many, many ways that we can try and integrate strengths-based approaches and strengths language into things that we're doing within the school community. Assemblies is another community events. Okay, I'm just looking to see if there's any more questions coming through. Using your language in the classroom as well as in the incidental. Yep, that's good. There's a question here about if a situation is damaging, do we pull the child out or build resilience? Again, I think that's a bit of an issue there about risk. You've got to think about issues about risk in those cases. And when I was saying before about pushing a child, I was thinking more in terms of the idea of, you know, the child obviously sometimes needs to take risks, and we need to give children an opportunity to do so, but obviously in an environment that you're sure is going to be safe. So I think we've got 5 minutes according to Susie. Cool. My computer's just gone off, is that right?
Yeah, you're still on.
Am I off?
You're still on my screen, so.
Okay, my screen,
Just close.
no, it's nothing there.
You're still on the screen.
Oh, that's fine.
Okay, so you're still on. Remember?
Okay,
So
yeah.
want to answer that last question. How do we address bullying?
Okay. So, question comes through about how we address bullying in relation to resilience. Okay, I think in terms of the issue about bullying, I think where it would fit within the idea of positive education is around looking at the idea of relationships, and helping young people to understand the impact of engendering obviously negative emotion and the dangers of that. There's an issue with strengths. I think I touched on the idea when we look at strengths use is that when we look at using our strengths, we try to get people to use strengths to enhance and not diminish, and helping people to understand that even if we have strengths, that to use those in a way which is going to undermine people and bully people and intimidate people is actually never going to be satisfactory. It's never going to be acceptable, and it's not going to be good for their own well-being their own well-being as well. So I think certainly in that area of positive relationships, that's certainly a good arena to raise those issues around sort of bullying and generally aggressive behaviour, because all the evidence suggests that it's not good. Obviously, it's certainly not good for the victims, but it's not good for the perpetrators either.
Did you see that last question?
Okay, what was that? What is it? That's the last one.
Social media and so interrupted. So
Okay, so in terms of social media, so I guess this means when you have young people who are engrossed maybe in Facebook, or when they're actually in the zone in terms of spending hours and hours on Facebook. I don't think there's necessarily any danger in interrupting flow. I mean, flow's a good state to be in, but it's like everything, you know, everything in moderation. And clearly, you know, if young people are spending hours and hours and hours and hours on Facebook, I mean, it's around recognizing that there's many other ways we can also get flow, and encouraging, you know, young people to look at those alternatives. But I understand the issue. I don't think I've got a direct suggestion as to what we might do about it, but interrupting it shouldn't be a particular problem.
did you want to take more, or
Sure.
thank them all for attending?
Okay, well, I'd like to thank you very much for attending. It's been great to have an opportunity to talk to you all, and if there's any more information we can provide, please let us know. So thank you very much.
And I'll send a recording as well.
Okay.